I like console release titles. So often, games that launch with a console are revolutionary, trumpeting forth the changing of the eras and showcasing the leap in technology that a new gaming system brings with it. Titles like Super Mario 64, Halo, Combat Evolved, and Wii Sports are staples of not just the consoles that they released on, but of that generation as a whole. They were exciting to play then, remain thrilling to this day, and are, in a sense, living artifacts of the moment in time in which they debuted to the world. Still, even more launch games don't cement their place in the good graces of history, instead gaining attention because there are so few options on launch day, and any shortcomings they may have become more apparent as a result. Games like Rise, Son of Rome, Heavenly Sword, and Knack all fall into this category. Games that are impressive graphically and do their job to display the technical prowess of the new hardware, but ultimately falling short of ever being considered a classic. GodFall largely is one of the latter. The game was first announced at the 2019 Game Awards, becoming the very first game to be confirmed as a PlayStation 5 exclusive. Coupled with its awe-inspiring visuals, fast action combat, and loot-centric gameplay, GodFall was set to be one of the first stars of Sony's new console when it released on November 12, 2020. However, GodFall simply came and went, fading into near obscurity. Today, we'll be diving into the game to see if it warrants a second look, some 3 years after hitting store shelves, or if it perhaps should be left as a footnote in examining the history of the PS5. But before we begin, please do the things with the buttons and the ringing of the bells and all of that stuff. You know what I'm talking about. Or maybe you're new to YouTube and are just confused, and in that case, I'm sorry. Welcome to the internet. GodFall was developed by Counterplay Games, a small 75-person studio made up of industry veterans who had previously worked on such acclaimed titles as Overwatch, Halo 5, and Destiny. The studio's previous game, a card-collecting strategy game named Duelist, was a minor success, funded primarily via Kickstarter and later through in-game purchases. Lead developer Keith Lee initially didn't want to go with this financial model, yet had to out of necessity. Thus he made it a goal to avoid it when they began work on their second game, GodFall. GodFall's primary focus is on collecting loot by completing objectives and defeating enemies, and Counterplay saw no better partner to publish the game than Gearbox, the minds behind the wildly successful Borderlands franchise. To further shore up the funds and bring their vision to life, Counterplay inked a deal to make it a PS5 exclusive and to have it out on launch day, giving Sony a bullet in the chamber in its war against Xbox. In GodFall, players control Orin, a Valorian knight who is at war with his power-hungry brother Macross. Once considered a hero, Macross learned of an ancient ritual that may grant any person who gathers enough Ethereum with the power of a god, yet will destroy the world in the process. Orin opposes this plan, and as such he sets out to gather the Ethereum himself so as to prevent Macross from using it for evil in an act to save the world rather than reduce it to ash. There's a nugget of a good story there, and a lot could be said about playing as a good guy with the same goal as the villain, but for the opposite reasons. But GodFall never really explores any of that. Instead, there's some small banter with NPCs in between endearing missions, and some codex entries gained from defeating enemies and finding collectibles. There's an attempt at fleshing out this game's world with meaningful lore, but it's really only surface-level stuff. It's a bare-bones plot that exists simply because a single-player action RPG must have a purpose. Now, I say single-player, but that's not completely true. The entirety of the game can be played alone from start to finish, and there's no real push to bring 2 other friends along on your journey. This is in part because the developers have made it extremely inconvenient to do so. For starters, online matchmaking is locked until you have reached the maximum level of 50. Now, to be fair, there's a great amount of stuff to do once you reach that coveted milestone, but only if you have interest in maximizing your character to their absolute limit. Playing with others before hitting level 50 is possible, but you can only join those that are already on your friends list. This is quite ridiculous for modern gaming, especially on a new PlayStation console. It's something that I'd expect to only see from Nintendo, and even then, it's bizarre. Such limitations really bog down the multiplayer, one of GodFall's best features, and while it can be great fun teaming up with friends, thwarting waves of fantastical enemies with characters tailor-made for specific combat roles, the hoops one has to jump through to get it all working make it almost not worth experiencing. I suppose this is as good of a time as any to talk about GodFall's greatest flaw. What is most baffling, and may have hurt the game the most upon its release, is that GodFall is largely a single-player, offline action RPG in the disguise of a live service game. At the time of GodFall's release, live service games were all the rage from publishers, as they had the potential to bring in mountains of cash. Titles such as Team Fortress 2, Candy Crush, Destiny 2, and Grand Theft Auto Online are just some of the leading examples of successes in a genre that has countless other failures. Games as a service have a real negative reputation in the gaming community, yet they can be extremely profitable in the few cases in which they are successful. In short, live service games are ever evolving, providing new content continually after release through updates. Sometimes players are made to subscribe to the game in order to play, but more often, these games make money by enticing players with unique costumes or randomized loot boxes that cost either a large sum of in-game currency or small amounts of real-world cash. The idea is that players will either spend countless hours grinding for in-game coin to earn the rewards that they want, or pony up a few bucks to obtain their prize instantaneously. The gaming community often bemoans this practice, as live service games are seen as placing a much greater emphasis on profit, rather than delivering a complete game all at once. GodFall, though, is a complete game, and doesn't feature any microtransactions like its live service counterparts. What it does have is gameplay centered almost entirely on combat, along with a major focus on grinding for hours on end for slightly better loot that will raise the stats of your character by a fraction at a time. Upon completing the story, all of this is inflated significantly, creating a game that can, in theory, be played indefinitely should you have the gumption to do so. GodFall Story Mode is a brisk 10 to 15 hour journey through 3 major realms, each consisting of their own isolated missions, unique enemies, and distinctive collectibles. Missions are pretty elementary. Go here, kill these enemies, then go to this other place and interact with an object, and lastly, go over there and fight that boss. When venturing from point to point, there are some minor obstacles requiring you to jump or climb, but otherwise it all boils down to killing everything in sight and grabbing anything of value. Each realm has its own open-ended Explorer mode, where you can freely take on side quests, fight enemies, and discover treasure to your heart's content. Side quests here are also extremely bare bones, consisting of the same kind of objectives as before, and the occasional easy puzzle, like interacting with these gems in a certain order. Here you also find the bulk of the loot needed to outfit and upgrade your character, so I do recommend spending a little time exploring in between story missions to ensure that you're fighting fit. The majority of GodFall is spent killing things, and combat, I would say, is above average. At first, combat feels slow and clunky, and doesn't give a good first impression. You have one weak, quick attack that you can string together for a small combo, as well as a strong, heavy attack. As you level up, however, your character will become much more nimble and learn an impressive amount of abilities depending on what you choose to invest in. Some of these skills include a sliding dodge, a shield throw, a shockwave blast, the ability to drain the health of enemies via a siphon, and more. Each segment of the skill grid can be upgraded up to level 5, making even the simplest abilities quite powerful. For example, the health siphon begins by slowly draining health for 4 seconds, but at max level, it takes only 2 seconds, and you can drain the health of 3 nearby enemies at once, and low-level enemies that are defeated with the ability become shadows that will join you in combat for half a minute. It really makes you feel powerful, taking a simple skill that you enjoy using and making it that much more lethal as you progress in the game. GodFall is also excellent in providing different ways for you to exploit your foes' weaknesses. You may want to use heavy attacks, for instance, to slowly build up a stagger meter that, when filled, leaves them open for a devastating finishing blow. Or perhaps you want to pile on numerous quick attacks and then follow those up with a single heavy move to cash in on all of that banked damage, causing defeated enemies to explode in a damaging blast of cosmic energy. Another ability allows players to build up energy while using one of their 2 equipable weapons, then switching them out when the energy is built up, creating an area of attack burst and boosting the weapon's stats for a short while. I like this one because it encourages gamers to utilize their weaponry more and make frequent changes during the heat of battle. Of course, some players may want to focus on just using one weapon, and the game accommodates this with the ability to enter into a rage state after dealing a lot of damage in a short amount of time, which increases their stats and grants their weapon new passive abilities for a time. Players with quick reflexes may opt to dodge enemy blows, which reveal weak points that, when hit, can deal crippling critical hits and other ailments. Or players may focus on parrying blows, which can stun their attackers and leave them vulnerable to destructive finishers. All that's to say is there's a lot of variety here, and it becomes exciting mastering all of these abilities and being able to pull them off in succession to take out a whole horde of foes. It can be a similar experience as late-game combat in the Batman Arkham games, or in God of War. In addition to the variety in abilities, players can also choose one of 12 Valor Plates as their avatar. These essentially boil down to the game's classes, with each having their own unique design and passive traits, and become procedurally unlocked as you progress in the game. Some of their traits include a little extra health, or dealing more damage to weak points, or granting stat boosts when using a specific weapon type, but honestly, their differences are so small that unless you're truly wanting to maximize your stats, I wouldn't worry about these differences too much, and instead just choose which one you think looks the coolest. The great thing is that you don't need to level up each one individually. Leveling up works across the board, and you can assign skill points and change your loadout for each Valor Plate should you wish. GodFall also provides a dizzying amount of loot to acquire and outfit your characters with. You have amulets and rings, banners that can be placed to give boosts to all of those around, life stones that can heal and provide buffs, and more. The developers have gone a little overboard with the sheer amount of things that you can equip at one time, and it took me longer than I would have liked to figure out how each equipped item actually benefited me. Weapons are plentiful, each with their own stats and abilities. However, weapon types can be a bit lacking, as there are only 5 to choose from: short swords, dual blades, polearms, massive warhammers, and large greatswords. Each of these control in their own way and are useful in their own situations. It takes some practice and experimentation, but it's thrilling to find 2 weapons that both work well together and feel comfortable to control and changing between them to dispense of your enemies. Speaking of, enemies are about what you'd expect from a fantasy action RPG. Goblins and warlocks, wolves and armored knights, hooded assassins and slithery gorgons. There's some impressive variety in their physical designs, but they all fall into only a few categories, and you'll soon recognize the same moves and behaviors from creatures from other missions and realms. Bosses can offer a good deal of challenge with their large health bars and brutal attacks, but they fall short of being the epic experiences I've come to expect from these types of games. This is because, despite their larger health bars, most boss fights end far too quickly when compared to other games in this genre. Minor bosses also get recycled into common enemies as you progress, and in the post-game challenges, even the major bosses get reused. Thus, they lose some of what makes them special. GodFall is also easy. On most difficulties, dying has no penalty and can actually be helpful. You simply respawn close to the area in which you died with full health and your consumable life stones replenished. Most enemies also don't refill their health, so any threat of losing is completely lost, and thus fights become less engaging. Hard difficulty does limit players to only 3 deaths per mission, which at least injects a little more fervor to combat, but everything else still applies. It's simply not enough to make it challenging. Graphically, the game is appealing. I like the art style and how the armors, creatures, and worlds all have a heavenly, almost ethereal design to them. You cannot help but think of gods and the Fae and worlds beyond our comprehension when you look at GodFall. I will say though that the bloom is pushed way too far, creating a blinding effect in certain environments. Does it add to the heavenly nature of the game? Yes, but it isn't easy on the eyes. You can enter into a mode that makes it easier to find collectibles, which highlights them in gold while graying out the rest of the environment, but I found this doesn't balance well with the exaggerated brightness that you normally see, and instead feels like you're getting the most of two extremes. Sound quality is also pleasing, if nothing too special. The music is appropriately epic, conveying that feeling of embarking on a quest to bring down a god, but aside from the main theme, I can't really think of any songs that actually stood out. Everything just kind of blends into the background. It's inoffensive, which is great, and complements the gameplay well, but again, nothing ever made me stop and say, wow, I like what I'm hearing. Voice acting, too, is passable. It's not award-winning and can be a little flat at times, but it's also not distracting. It's just there. GodFall failed to make much of a splash at launch, and thus shortly thereafter, the developers announced that a PS4 version would be coming to stores, which it finally did so in August of 2021. This stripped-down version is what you would expect. It's the same game, but with poorer graphics, longer loading times, and a good deal less polish in the technical field. In April, the game finally made the jump to Xbox One and Series XS consoles, with similar results to their PlayStation counterparts. With all this in mind, GodFall may seem like the perfect candidate for the PlayStation Plus subscription program, and as a matter of fact, it did release there in December of 2021, in a way. The PS Plus and PC exclusive Challenger Edition is a rather unique take on the game that removes the entire story and instead starts players at maximum level, free to use matchmaking and engage in all the in-game content that they may want. While this may be appealing to some people, it eliminates the game of any real personality, however small it was to begin with. It also ruins any semblance of growing your character, gradually leveling up and acquiring increasingly more powerful gear as you climb the ranks to challenge your evil brother. That's one of the most enjoyable aspects of these types of games after all, so if that's what you're looking for, you're not going to find it in the Challenger Edition. Other players may also be curious about the Definitive Edition, which packs in all the game's DLC into one nice package. If you really enjoyed the base game, to the point where you'll want to play for near endless hours fighting foes and collecting just slightly better gear, then there's enough to satisfy your desire. What you don't get is more story, new valor plates, new weapon types, or anything that significantly adds to the game. GodFall's rather short story mode is worth journeying through alone or with two friends. Grinding to maximum level and partaking in the post-game activities, however, is only worth it if you really are enamored of the game's combat. Fortunately, fighting enemies with your godlike powers can be really enjoyable, but GodFall's many shortcomings, such as a lackluster story and easy breezy difficulty, dull the experience significantly. Thank you all for watching. Please hit like, hit subscribe if you aren't already a subscriber, and thank you so much to all those that are. Shout out to my patrons Late to Gaming, Celeste R, David L, Dan M, and Josh M. If you'd like to join them and gain advanced access to my videos, behind the scenes footage, and previews for upcoming videos, then please consider donating to my Patreon. For just $1, you can enjoy all my Patreon benefits. Links to that and my social media pages are listed on the left and in the description below. Thank you once again, and take care, everyone.